Okay, so we're going to now have a look at the sugars that are available in our water drinks. The types of sugars we can have, there's 3 different types of sugars. We can have sucrose, which is a dimer of both glucose and fructose. Depending on the type of sugars they use will often depend on where they're made. Now before we can do anything else, we have to make a calibration curve for glucose and fructose. Glucose and fructose are reducing sugars, so we will be able to use something called DNSA to actually measure it. But before we do any of that, we have to make our different dilutions of glucose. So I have a glucose powder and I'm going to make a standard solution. Now my standard solution is I'm going to start off with 0.7 grams of this. So I'm very carefully measuring it in. And that's about the right amount now. And then I'm quantitatively going to put it in a volumetric flask. So here's my volumetric flask, it's 100 mils. And I'm going to quantitatively put it in, which means I have to make sure I get all of it in. To do that, I'm going to first of all tap it all out of here. And you will see that there is some left. Just tap it back through. Now there will be some left behind, and remember I need all of it to make sure I have a full standard solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wash everything down to the sides, small amounts. And I'm going to do the same thing in my funnel, and I'll do that a few times just to make sure I've got none of it left behind. Now, once I'm sure that I've got all my glucose out, I can now make sure that I've got it all out. I'm going to make sure it's gone down the funnel as well. And when that's done, I now need to make it up to 100 mils. That is why I've got a volumetric flask. I have the mark that I'm going to make it up to. Must be exactly that. Little hints that you might remember from your early science training. If I'm looking down at an angle, any levels that come up to, we're going to get parallax error. So I always need to make sure that I bob down so that my eye is equal height to the mark that I'm going to be putting it up to. And I need to make sure that I am taking it from the bottom of the meniscus. So the bottom of the meniscus is that little curve, and the bottom of that curve is what should be on that line. Okay, so now we're getting close to the mark. I need to make sure I take my funnel out, and I'm going to be doing it really carefully till I get close, and then I'll use a plastic pipette. Now I'm getting close, so what I'm going to do, just to be sure, those last little bits, and now I'm right on the mark. I'm going to mix all of this up. This is my standard solution of glucose that I'll then make all my other dilutions for my calibration curve. So I've mixed up my standard solution of glucose, and now we're going to do a series of dilutions. These dilutions are going to be so that we can do our calibration curve. So I've already done them for us. I have here just distilled water, and I've got a series of dilutions across until I have just my standard solution. So I have no glucose in this one, and I have just my standard solution in this one, and I've got a series of dilutions all the way across. So what I'm now going to do is add my color agent. My color agent, this is DNSA. It's going to react or be reduced by the glucose and fructose. And as it gets reduced, it's going to become a lovely reddy brown color depending on the concentration of the reducing sugars. So what I need to do now is I've added 1 ml of my DNSA into my second lot of test tubes. And I'm going to have to add now 1 ml into each of these test tubes. So I'm going to start out with my distilled water. 1 ml of my distilled water is going into the equivalent of the DNSA. And of course I need to change my tip each time. So now that I've done that, I have each of my solutions, and I've deliberately named them the same names as before, so I've recorded down all my dilutions. Now I want to speed up my reaction, and like any other chemical reactions, I can speed it up by increasing the heat. So I have some simmering water, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all my tubes into the simmering water. And in 5 minutes, we should see how the glucose and fructose have reduced the DNSA to the reddy brown ANSA. So our 5 minutes are up, and I've removed my glucose standards with the DNSA from my boiling water and allowed it to cool a little bit. And what we have, if I just pull some of them out so that you can compare, we can see a range of different colors because there's different amounts of the DNSA has been reduced by the different amounts of the glucose. So our different concentrations of glucose will show up in the different colors. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add 0.5 mils of each of these into 12 mils of water. I need to dilute it a little bit. At the moment, they're still too concentrated. The absorbance would be way too high. We must always have the absorbance between 0.1 and 0.8. So I'm going to add 0.5 mils of each of these into here, and then we'll give it a mix and add them into our cuvettes, and our cuvettes will measure the absorbency. Okay, so we've now got all our solutions, we've all got them correctly mixed. We're going to add 1 ml or approximately 1 ml into each of these cuvettes, and then we'll measure the absorbency. So now what I've done is I've taken all my samples and put it into my cuvettes, and you'll be able to see the different colours, especially if I put something white behind it. So our different colours are because the different amounts of DNSA have been reduced to the ANSA. So now I need to measure the absorbency of my different solutions. So what I'm going to do is, using the cuvettes, our cuvettes have got different sides. They've got a clear side and they've got a frosted side. Now the frosted side is the side that I grab hold of. The clear side is the one that I don't want any fingerprints on. So what I'm going to do is pick it up by using the frosted sides. I'm going to take a little tissue and wipe the clear sides, making sure there's no smudge marks and that it is nice and clear. And then I'm going to put it into my spectrophotometer. Now my spectrophotometer is going to measure how much a particular wavelength of light is absorbed by my solution. So at this stage it's measuring for 535 nanometers, that's the wavelength of the light, and it's going to measure how much light is absorbed. Not the amount of light emitted, the amount of light that is absorbed. So I'm going to lift it up. I'm going to put in so that the light will go straight through the clear side, not the frosted side. Now because this is my non-glucose, this is the one with just distilled water, this is going to be my 0. So I'm going to 0 it, just using this one. And it doesn't take very long to happen. And what it does is it will put that onto 0. Now I can measure the next one. And I'll do one more to show you. Making sure I only touch the frosted sides. I'm going to wipe the clear sides to get rid of smudges. Put it in. Now it's already been zeroed, so all I need to do is press enter to get the actual measurements. I'm going to do that for all of my samples, and then I'll be able to make up a calibration curve, and that calibration curve will then allow me to read off my actual measurements for my sports drinks later.